Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to CGHE seminar slash webinar number 324. I'm Mary, the CGHE communications officer, taking over for Simon today. And today we'll be hearing from Kazuhiro Kudo on language and intercultural student interactions, insights from a cosmopolitan agency perspective. So before I hand over to Kazuhiro, we just have a few housekeeping slides to go through. I'll just bring those up. So this webinar is being recorded and will be posted online on the CGHE website tomorrow morning. A transcript of the chat function conversation will also be posted. Please keep yourself muted unless you have been asked to speak or ask a question. There's no need to have your video on during the webinar, but please do so when asking a question. We recommend using the speaker view in Zoom so that you can more clearly see everyone who's talking. To ask a question, use the chat function and write out the question you wish to ask. At the end of the presentation, if your question is selected, you will be invited to ask it yourself directly. When invited to ask a question, please unmute yourself, switch on your video and state your name and where you're from. So before I pass over to Kazuhiro now, just a brief introduction. Kazuhiro Kudo is an associate professor in the Faculty of Foreign Languages at Dokkyo University, Japan, and a board member of the Intercultural Education Society of Japan. His most recent research interests are centered around the intersection of intercultural interaction, cosmopolitanism, conviviality, and agency in higher education contexts. So with that, I will hand over to you, Kazuhiro.
Okay, thank you, Mary. And thank you, Simon, for having me here, but it's a bit unfortunate that his internet connection is not strong enough. And also, dear my colleagues and some of my friends are here present, and I'd like to welcome you all. And let me now share my screen. And this is okay. So now, can you see it, the slides, Mary?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so let me start my presentation about this topic. And my title is Language and Intercultural Student Interactions, Insights from a Cosmopolitan Agency Perspective. In recent years, I've been focusing on conceptual work on cosmopolitan agency as enabler of intercultural relationships between students, which is found difficult in many countries. And in my recent publication, I defined cosmopolitan agency as a reflexive expression of openness, inclusion, and morality beyond cultural and personal difference towards a better future. And of course, this particular agency and me and also other researchers have identified this as a quite important indicator of meaningful intercultural interactions. But looking at literature, of course, the vast majority of the literature comes from Anglophone countries, and so relatively little is known about the extent to which this cosmopolitan agency works and does not work in various institutional contexts. And particularly, I have a little concern that this particular agency, the cosmopolitan agency, may favor students with high English language proficiency, even in non-Anglophone countries such as Japan, where I come from, where English medium instruction is gradually increasing and under the initiatives of internationalization. But as I noted, and the role of the language in students' engagement or disengagement in intercultural interactions from cosmopolitan agency and other agency perspective has received little attention. Of course, there are lots of work focusing on experiences, particularly of international students over the language use and its relation to intercultural relationships. But my focus is for today, it's the role of language from cosmopolitan agency. So this is sort of a semi-conceptual paper, I would say, rather than a strong empirical one. So this presentation will provide hopefully new insights into the role of language in intercultural interactions from a cosmopolitan agency perspective. So toward this aim, I draw on multi-disciplinary literature, particularly about agency, intercultural interactions, and multilingualism. And also, I'd like to draw some empirical data from Japan and Finland, another non-English speaking country, I mean, non-Anglophone countries. And so in this presentation, I have two parts. So first part, let me illustrate my conceptual framework actually on cosmopolitan agency. And then on the basis of this framework, I just like to present two salient themes. And of course, I'll talk about the details, but my message is that I hope this presentation will shed light on creative and inclusive connectivity beyond linguistic and cultural differences, and also the role of individual and institutional agency to foster such creative and inclusive connectivity. And then I finally talk about directions for future research and practice. So now let me introduce you my conceptual framework and from ecological and personal context perspective. And yeah, I just read aloud the theoretical proposal first. So cosmopolitan agency, I forgot to mention the definition perhaps in the first part. Yeah, so this is the definition. The cosmopolitan agency is a reflexive expression of openness, inclusion, and morality beyond cultural and personal difference towards a better future. So it's cosmopolitan agency, in my understanding, is a reflexive action or act with difference. And then how this agency emerged? Well, this agency emerges as the dynamic expression interface between cosmopolitan capital and affordances in convivial proximity. And so to explain a bit more, so my conception of cosmopolitan agency, it starts with cosmopolitan capital, which denotes students' embodied, objectified, and institutionalized resources, such as multilingual skills or prior international experiences. So it's rests on the capital rests on past individual experience. And then the students bring this past experience of cosmopolitan capital to a concrete space or environment named affordance, the convivial proximity. And then in this particular environment, the students envision future. So that's why I put the future projection. So it's students project future in the new environment. So students bring in the past experience and looking at future prospect in the environment. So what I mean by affordances and convivial proximity is that I focus on the multi-layered environment affording casual, temporary, and friendly interactions between students. So as you can see in the bottom part of the slides, actually my area work identified or found that actually this cosmopolitan agency tends to appear informal curriculum or non-formal curriculum environments such as dormitory, culturally mixed dormitories or students' organizations or even private parties rather than taught courses led by lecturers. And so then altogether, the cosmopolitan agency, I mean, the students engage in reflexivity and to mobilize this cosmopolitan capital by means of the convivial proximity. So cosmopolitan agency is the present practice, but it's rests on the dynamic interaction of the past experience and future projection. Then, how this framework links to today's presentation? Well, this is my assumption for today is that students utilize a linguistic repertoire at cosmopolitan capital to engage in intercultural interactions. Okay. So before I touch on two main themes, which I like to stress today, let me explain to you what empirical data I rely on, as well as the literature. So there are three universities pine, they're all students, of course, pine, bamboo, and birch. And what is important is that the language of instruction is different across the three institutions. So at Pine University, Japanese university, where only 2% of students were international, and mostly all courses were taught in Japanese. Of course, there are foreign language classes, including second foreign languages. Actually, this is a very important part of my today's presentation. And then the Bamboo University is a bilingual university. So it has a bilingual policy, and in which there are 50 and 50 international and domestic ratio. And then finally, there's a Finnish university. I put the word birch, and the Finnish and the language, Finnish and English are used for instruction, but most of significant majority of international students learn courses in English. So whereas the local students have a choice, Finnish or English. And of course, this is not the empirical study, so I will not claim the strong generalizability of the issues I will discuss today. But I should note before I highlight my argument is this. So the language of instructions are these, but when it comes to students' interactions across cultures, and so I have to clarify this. And I mean, what I mean by intercultural interactions today is mostly interactions between international and domestic students. Although there are some cases where international students and international students coming from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds interact, but largely the examples I use for today's presentation is largely the ones occurring between international and domestic students. So these are actually the languages I could find. And so in Pine University, where Japanese is the main language, interestingly, the English was actually used among some students. And also, actually, yeah, as you might expect, the Finnish language, actually with only 5 million speakers, with comparison to the Japanese, Japanese has 120 plus million speakers exist. But so at Birch University, almost all intercultural interactions had to take place in English. But thirdly, the use of other languages such as Mandarin Chinese and Spanish were observed actually across in all three universities. And so depending on institutions, students were positioned to choose or not to choose a language for interaction. So now let me illustrate more details for each language and language use. So the theme one, I mean, I'm going to show you two major themes. So this is the one major theme that I want to stress. So the first one is the existence of three kinds of interculturality with varying degrees of creativity and inclusiveness. So there are actually three kinds of interculturality. I mean, I used a slightly different terminology that I compared to the ones I put in the abstract available on the website. But I think I just found these words may fit better than the previous version. And so the global interculturality, local interculturality, and global interculturality, the three kinds of interculturality existed across, from my data across three universities. And the global interculturality, what I mean by this is the students utilize a global lingua franca, such as English, to explore global connectivity beyond perceived and cultural and personal differences. And of course, the cosmopolitan agency is pertinent to inclusiveness or acceptance of perceived cultural and personal differences. But the way students communicated by using English, they have a global reference. So here is the example. So global and English was mostly used. And so this one domestic student at the Japanese university say that when international students first contact anything, oh, he's Japanese, but he speaks good English very well. You can get along with them. So what this suggests is that the English language, the proficiency of English language of domestic students actually is quite helpful to mingle with our international students. With not necessarily the Japanese cultural components included in their daily conversations. Whereas the next one, local connectivity, was observed among students who utilize a host national languages such as Japanese, but not Finnish, to explore local connectivity beyond perceived cultural and personal differences. So here's the example. One domestic student at Pine University and said that the one international student asked me to coach him on Japanese because he had job interviews in the Japanese, in the Japanese language. So we practice interviewing together these days. So this person, Takeshi, was asked by his international friends, and they utilized the Japanese language as a resource for local connectivity, because this international students wanted a job, security in the Japanese company after graduating from university. And so the third is a global interculturality, whereby students utilize a multilingual repertoire, such as translanguaging, to explore creative connectivity beyond perceived and cultural practice differences. Actually, I should also add that while they may run counter to institutional language policy. So what I mean by this is this. So yeah, there are many examples of language mixing or code switching or translanguaging. So for instance, the same person who helped one international student with a job interview said, with another international student, I have a qualification for teaching Japanese, and I offer to tutor an international student in Japanese. And when I have some questions about English, I can easily ask her in return. So he used English and Japanese depending on what he or what his friends want. So he used kind of code switching strategies. And next example, yes, it's translanguaging, which it's almost like one's idiolect or one's linguistic repertoire. So people mix different languages almost naturally without regard for socially and politically defined language names and levels. So code switching is almost like the people with a conscious, consciously change the switch between 2 or 3 different, multiple languages. And for instance, this Takeshi actually did not like to use translanguaging when he communicates with others, but other students, there are so many examples like this. So I just show you one example like this. And so Amalia is an international student at Bamboo University, and she said, I cannot speak only English or only Japanese. Yes, why? And then her Japanese friend said, wakaranai. And then this international student switched to almost, instantly the wakaranai. And I think many ryugakusei mo, not only me like this, they mazeru, they mix it. So there are lots of instances, examples of translanguaging. And this particularly when I look back, when I looked at the pair interviews, because, I forgot to mention this, but in the Japanese universities, and I conducted not only individual interviews, but also some pair interviews between intercultural friends and even those 2 individuals in romantic relationships. So, I as far as my observation was concerned, there might be some limitations of global or local interculturality. So the dominance of only one language in intercultural interaction scenes. And so this observation perhaps resonates with Kumar and Weri Khalad's argument that interculturality contributes to creating cultural comfort zones for a particular group of people while constructing zones of absence for some other groups. So particularly in Japanese universities, in both Pine and Bamboo universities, students who are not confident in speaking English were actually almost kind of felt a zone of absence or almost excluded from such a cosmopolitan space because for fear of losing maybe confidence or not simply being able to communicate cross-culturally or with the international students. So in contrast, my emphasis for today is something like global interculturality is open to creative connectivity beyond perceived cultural and personal differences. And one note is that actually, particularly the language policy of the universities, it's not the scope of my observation, empirical observation, but some universities actually have a English-only policy at university. But in reality, as other recent works from China shows that actually students use translanguaging and it's almost unconsciously, quite regularly. So it's very, very important that the institutions acknowledge such student practices if institutions really want to forge intercultural interactions and learning. So going back to my argument, the second point for this theme is institutional affordances constraints. So Birch University, Finnish University, where international students were not expected to be proficient in a local language because all the courses international students were taking were taught in English. This university afforded only global interculturality, which is good for many international students, very capable of English, but that may have excluded many local domestic students who are not comfortable speaking at this language. And then Pine and Bamboo universities offered all forms of interculturality, but Bamboo, with the bilingual policy, afforded more global interculturality than Pine. So especially the translanguaging was very, very much commonly observed in Bamboo University. Let's now move on to the second main argument or issue. The theme to translocal linguistic capital as an enabler of critical cosmopolitan agency that intervenes in lingual cultural inequalities. Translocal linguistic capital, I forgot to mention this, that all three are translocal more or less, because, even though there's only one language used, say only English or only Japanese, once people from different places come together, there's always potential for translocal interactions. That's the interaction styles or content that goes beyond local cultural or social context. So this second theme stresses the importance of equipping students with translocal linguistic capital. Because I was able to observe many, I was able to see many cases in which students exhibited critical cosmopolitan agency to interfere in linguistic and cultural inequalities. So what I mean by critical cosmopolitan agency is the reflexive expression of openness, inclusion, and morality with a critical outlook on unequal power relations. So largely in this presentation, the unequal power relations derive from English or Japanese or any other common languages. The imbalance in the capacity to express or exercise the fully express the human agency. So self-efficacious students with translocal linguistic capital, such as this student, was able to exercise critical cosmopolitan agency. So interestingly, named Maya, this Finnish local students, domestic students, volunteered to become an international student body. And because unfortunately her university did not offer enough or much opportunity for both international and domestic students to mix together, actually she volunteered to become international student body, and then she invited some both local, domestic, and international students to her place, her apartment or home. And so she spoke, she used actually only English. So, but she was able to create a space where students were trying to be convivial, to try to be nice. So she said that, I said to my friends, this is a domestic student friend who don't want to speak English. That's okay. Just come and let's see how things go. So you can just listen if you want. You don't need to participate in the talking. So she just tried to gather students from different countries and different backgrounds, and then she tried to create a space. And so by using actually only English. But the thing is that because she had a prior international experience as Erasmus student, speaking only Spanish in Spain, she already had developed a kind of autonomous reflexivity to exercise critical cosmopolitan agency. So she had equipped herself with translocal linguistic capital, and then she, even though she was not able to use Finnish to communicate with international students, she tried to mix both international and domestic students to in English. So she said her past experience. So why this? Why she took exercise such agency to mix students? She said, I was the only exchange student when she was in Spain. So everybody was just like coming to me and said, who are you and why are you here? And I got really warm welcome there. Almost no one talked English, so I really had to learn Spanish. After the Erasmus, I was here just with the Finnish students. They became kind of boring for me because I didn't have a challenge. And really soon after my exchange, I felt like I need to have something. So to sum up, in this presentation, I highlighted 4 main issues. So first one is the 3 kinds of interculturality vis-a-vis language use. And of course, with each language use having a different, perhaps levels or degree of creativity and inclusiveness. And secondly, geopolitical institutional affordances or language use and interculturality. So in comparison to Japan, where there are, the Japanese language with more than 125 million speakers, Finnish only had 5 million speakers. And at universities, and Finnish can be, of course, learned, of course, but Finnish cannot or could not be the language for instructions for mixed classroom between international and domestic students. So such geopolitical institutional affordance as actually the constraints has a lot of influences in students' language use. And then, as I showed a bit earlier, the translocal linguistic capital can be an enabler of critical cosmopolitan agency. So I can almost replace cosmopolitan capital with translocal linguistic capital, and that enables intervention in lingual cultural inequalities. And finally, prior experience as a linguistic minority, such as Erasmus in non-native language arenas and contexts, afforded autonomous reflexivity and critical cosmopolitan agency. So now, finally, I'd like to just show my reflections and also directions for future research. Because I only had access to a limited number of institutions, of course, the applicability of the explored themes in this presentation have to be considered. Particularly, some of the issues might apply in even English-speaking context. And also, I could not touch much on the issues of multimodal and multisensory resources because I largely focused on verbal languages. But of course, the language includes many other modalities such as gestures, emoticons such as emoji or text, and just as we now using on this Zoom, or voice tone, or even other online technology and so on. So the language, especially the translanguaging exercise or the practice is not limited to semiotic resources, but other sensory and modal resources. And also the language is very much linked with gender perhaps or religions. And I can easily draw many examples because in Japanese language, Japanese language is very much attached to the gender difference. So the females and the males speak sometimes very different in terms of grammar and word vocabularies. They are very different. So yeah, I could not touch upon this intersectional aspect of language use. And also this presentation, because of the focus is the meaningful or positive cosmopolitan agency and intercultural interactions, I could not deal with negative experiences over interculturality. But nevertheless, I just hope this presentation has helped you understand a slightly different perspective of intercultural interactions. Particularly, I'd like to stress this importance of institutional interventions that provide students with opportunities to practice translocal linguistic capital that permits creative and inclusive interculturality, such as translanguaging. So I think it's almost time. Thank you very much for your patience. And I look forward to getting feedback and taking as many questions as possible. Thank you. So, given that Simon is not able to speak today, I should perhaps find the questions in chat. So, congratulations. So may I ask Victoria Triff to say a few words? Yeah, sorry, I did not have time to read your chat because I was, just finishing my talk. So yeah, thank you for giving me a positive, some positive. Yeah. So would you tell me or something? Tell us something.
First of all, hello and congratulations for your presentation. It is very interesting. I was very interested in this kind of research in the literature from the fieldwork, and I was focused especially on the possible biases involved in your collected data. I am wondering if it is possible to link some connections between the limitation of global and local interculturality and this kind of possible biases, cognitive and cultural biases. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So you seem to have raised two important issues, particularly first research methodology. And because so many studies on international students' experience and also intercultural interaction issues have covered negative ones, such as lack of interactions or the absence of meaningful friendships and so on. My empirical research was very much focusing on collecting good stories of how this positive interactions such as friendships or even altruistic behaviors such as volunteering, in collaboration with students coming from different countries work. So definitely my data collection have lots of perhaps on one hand positive aspects to collect many positive signs, but on the other hand, because of that, maybe some of the students may probably hesitate to speak up, maybe something, the other side, because I was very curious to learn positive, and so please tell me positive stories, what's going on, and using different languages as well as your cultural resources. So maybe there might be some impact. And also the absence of my attention at that time to focus on other cultural aspects, such as religion or agendas and so on, which I illustrated in the final slides about the intersectionality. So I think that's kind of a big limitation. And also I have to note that actually the Finnish data was not collected by me, but my mentor and my colleague, Professor Simon Bolet. And so she and I are now working in actually the role of reflexivity in students' engagement in intercultural interactions, and also the place of intercultural interactions for as an enabler or, for those students' future career as actually the future teacher. And then in that interviews also I have seen, of course I was not the one who interviewed, but there was a kind of difficulties involved in collecting students' inner voice, because the interview was, of course, some of the interviews were actually conducted in Finnish, but it's involved in a bit of translation, and also the interviews conducted was English, their non-native language. So we cannot still emphasize how much we were able to touch on the heart of students' inner voice. So that kind of limitation, I'm aware of that. And also thank you for addressing and liking almost like the idea of global and local, the limitation of global and local interculturality. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And so we really, particularly we need to focus more on the extent to which the institutions can actually accept those almost like unique or creative use, such as translanguaging, as educational, medium. It's such language can be recognized as, educated, fine language, as opposed to sort of monolingual approach. So yeah, that kind of area, probably we can work on towards the future. Yeah, thank you. So other questions, perhaps? Yeah, there's one request about showing, can you see any emerging models facilitating student NEC? And of course, I can show this. And while I show this, I can focus on other maybe questions. Let's see, where's this message is coming through the case. So Akiyoshi, yeah, Yonezawa-san. Okay, would you speak up? Can you speak something for us?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you again. And this is a really fascinating discussion. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Do you hear me?
Yeah,
okay.
Yes.
I think your usage of the term cosmopolitan agency means that it is not just the make a linkage between the two language world, means that the people who talk who are the native speaker in English and the native speaker in Japanese, it is not your assumption, but much more the people who use the English as a kind of common language, means that there are many people who are non-native, means that there are kind of the multi-linguistic settings in the end, but there are two languages that are mainly utilized in this context. And then my question is that I was really interested in, especially for the case of the person who has a prior experience of the language minority, but maybe my assumption is that if you accumulate such a experiences with a quite different setting. For example, the one person, for example, experienced Japanese, Chinese language setting, and then the Spanish, Finnish language setting, and the English, German language setting, and then these accumulation of the different types of setting may change the perspective or the widen the perspective than the person who only knows the one experience of the specific two language context. So could I elaborate more that this kind of a discussion means that so what kind of the learning experience can be makes difference or not, and also it is possible to make the intentional educational program to design such a multilinguistic settings, for example, at the university education or something.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, your first part of the first part of your comment is very interesting and also important, and more people should, I mean, focus on the language as both an enabler and also the blocker of intercultural learning. And so, yeah, that's so yeah, because I think the one important aspect when it comes to intercultural learning or growth or whatever term you use, is probably an experience of becoming the other. So as long as you are in a comfort, I mean, linguistically comfort area, you cannot be labeled as the other. You are labeled maybe as a native speaker or somebody coming from very much a privileged, I mean, culturally or linguistically privileged position. So as far as you stick to that position, I don't think you can learn and you can grow and you can find even the capacity, I mean, the potential capacity as an active agent and to act on difference and act on social issues. And so I think it's very, very much crucial, especially I want to stress this point to people studying only in one language. And particularly Anglophone countries, and so these are the issues that have to be dealt with more seriously, because most international students are multilingual and bilingual and multilingual. So the question is how universities can cater such students' needs through formal as well as informal arrangement. So my earlier work on intercultural relationship development was very much revealing the importance of informal spaces, especially the kitchens in the dormitory. And that's the place where really students open up themselves and trying to, exchange everything almost. So I think thank you very much. I mean, so I think there must be something that, internationalization strategies can touch on seriously over the issue of language. And do not treat language as a barrier, but language as a resource for cosmopolitan learning. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So next question. Oops, I have many questions. So, thank you. Nadia, yeah, we still have about 10 minutes. So I just called maybe 3 persons.
Yeah.
And so Nadia and Seon, and finally Marta Kazuhiro. Yeah, all 3 persons. So can I take comments or questions from 3 persons, and then I should probably make a final statement. How does it sound? Okay, Simon. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. My name was called the first one, so I will start here. Thank you for your interesting presentation and very important here. And my question was, have you already researched about how to avoid or improve negative influence of this intercultural learning? Okay.
Thank you. And then Soyeon?
Yeah, Yes,
Oh.
Hiro, thank you. Thank you so much for your presentation and a long time no see. And my
Yeah.
questions are two, if time allows. So I'm wondering if you are assuming different extent of agency or more developed or greater extent of agency, cosmopolitan agency among local, global, and local language resources. That was my first question. And the first one is, how would you explain the role of cosmopolitan agency in not only affected and shaped by the affordances and the capitals, but also in a way that it can affect and enhances the affordances in an environment and also the resources? Yes.
Oh, yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Then Marta.
If I may, first of all, domo arigatou gozaimashita. That was excellent.
Okay, thank you.
If I may ask, I'm really curious, since language and cosmopolitan agency can be seen both as an asset. Are there any models or even initiatives on part of institutions you've examined to facilitate students developing these? Or is it perhaps just students acting on their own?
Yeah, thank you very much. Probably I should comment on the last one. So yeah, there are a few papers actually comparing the extent to which those papers do not use the term cosmopolitan agency, but these studies will examine the extent to which students exhibit something cosmopolitan through extracurricular activity or formally taught programs. And then the answer is the students' social organization for social activities or for common good. Actually, in that situation, the students exhibited the strongest nature of cosmopolitanism, and because the students had freedom and the students had to initiate convert their mission into actual practice. So I think it's quite important that universities, knowing that they offer academic courses, they can actually offer a non-academic. And so the question is how much or to what extent or how those academic and non-academic, or formal or non-formal activities can be combined towards the positive synergy effects. And then probably the how to avoid and the influence negative interactions or negative the relationship. And because my talk today was very much about the positive interactions, so that's the other side, I should say, of the coin. And to be honest, from the viewpoint of multilingualism, of course, there are many studies focusing on the international students who face difficulties, particularly in English-speaking countries. So I think there are many, stories and examples of multilingual students having difficulty in changing themselves or adjusting themselves into a monolingual host society. So I think that kind of design always has difficulties, and because the power relations between the host, domestic, and international incoming students are almost fixed. And so I think, yeah, of course, Nadia, Nadia, if we can communicate, of course, I can send you some, of course, references. And finally, Soyeon, and it's always good to hear from your interesting comments about the relationship between agency and environment or affordances. And of course, I fully agree the importance of looking at the role of cosmopolitan agency towards the environment or affordances. And of course, yes, maybe it may probably take time to actually address this very important question, because the one big limitation of my presentation or something like this, it's just one-off interview. So I don't have longitudinal interview. So because usually the individual impacts on structure takes a lot of time. So, but I fully agree the potential, and also want to believe in such students' agency can change the environment in a positive sense. And also how I can assess. I mean, probably you gave me homework, or perhaps the next task is to engage in more systematic empirical work on the extent to which the local, global, and global and local interculturality can be exhibited across 3 universities, and also the way these are exhibited differently between international and domestic students. So I think such more refined or a nuanced understanding of interculturality may give perhaps both theoretical and practical implications, perhaps. Yeah, thank you very much. And probably we have a few more minutes, and probably one more person, perhaps finally, Lee. Sorry, Lee.
Yeah, Ji.
Young. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So I wonder, I have a question about the methodology, or I guess the analysis. So I wonder, like, when you're analyzing the interculturality among students' communications and interactions, I wonder if you look specifically at the different types of communications between different types of students, such as local versus international students, and between international students, like international students versus international students, like for instance,
Yeah, thank you. Because the vast majority of literatures still shows the difficulties between the interactions between domestic and international. So my research, my empirical data are largely focused on that aspect, rather than between international and also domestic students with diverse immigrants and backgrounds and so on. So yeah, but I think the findings should, in some, of course, aspects should resonate. The interactions between international and domestic students, some of the issues, even the language issues may probably have very interesting aspect. And one thing I could not note is about the importance of second foreign language teaching in Japanese universities, because many students who learn Chinese, Spanish, or German as a second foreign language, they are some of them are quite happily trying out their opportunities to communicate with international students coming from such linguistic backgrounds. So I think the second language, foreign language teaching, it has still a scope, because so many institutions nowadays stress the English as a foreign or second language in non-Anglophone countries. But there are still a lot of actually scope and the potentials for second or third foreign languages actually learning for both international and domestic students. Yeah, thank you for raising this important question.
Thank you.
Wow, I have received many messages, and probably, it's now time almost noon. And so how does my performance sound? Simon, did you write something, or otherwise, Mary?
Yes, sorry. I think that Simon, unfortunately, still is not able to hear us. So do you have any sort of last closing remarks that you'd like to make before we finish off the webinar?
Yes, of course. Because luckily this is the final webinar for this year, and of course this year we have lots of global affairs, as we all know. And of course, one thing we really need to focus in relation to this today's presentation is perhaps the place of language, and also I think more research on the higher education should stress the role of non-English and also non-English scholarship as well. So hopefully next time, I'm also actually interested in the internationalization of academic knowledge. How we actually, as scholars, and can enhance, particularly dialogues across the linguistic differences. So hopefully, I can come back with different ideas and with different topics. And there are some cosmopolitan component in it, actually. Yeah, so I really want to appreciate everybody. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today.
Great. Thank you, Hiro. I've just had a message from Simon. He says he can't hear very much, but well done for handling a good set of questions.
Okay.
So thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and thank you as well for your patience with the technical issues that we've had today. Also, thank you, Hiro, for a very interesting talk and also for sharing at last minute. So this was actually our last webinar for this year, but we have a lot of very exciting events coming up next year. Starting in January, on the 10th of January, on Tuesday, we are starting with our humanities series of talks. So lots of interesting events. Please keep up to date with CGHE so that you can see when these events happen. You can look at our event listing on the website or also subscribe to our newsletter, both of which I've linked in the chat. But otherwise, thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Hopefully we will see you in the new year, and happy holidays and happy new year. Right.
Thank you.
Okay. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.